Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to begin by answering some questions that I've been asked about the subject of pure awareness, manōnāśa and manōlaya. The first three questions, three questions were asked by someone by email, and others are some related questions that were asked on the comments of various videos on YouTube. So the first question is, in waking and dream, ego holds on to body, within brackets all five, which I assume is referring to all the five sheaths. In sleep, there is no ego, so nothing is there, but I am aware of that. I feel present. I feel some awareness is still there because it's knowing that nothing is there. Is that pure awareness? Firstly, in sleep, we don't actually know that nothing is there. What we know in sleep is only our own being. I am. We know I am, and we don't know anything other than that. Knowing that nothing is there, that is how we interpret it from the perspective of the perspective of ego and waking and dream. We say, I knew nothing in sleep, or I did not know anything in sleep. Because now, as ego, we take the awareness of all this multiplicity to be knowledge or awareness. So we feel a state in which we do not experience any multiplicity. We do state in which we are not aware of anything other than ourselves. We think such a state is either a state of knowing nothing, or not a state of not knowing anything, or as people generally consider it, it's a state of unconsciousness. It's not actually a state of unconsciousness because we experience that state. What we are not conscious or aware of in sleep is anything other than ourselves. But we continue to be aware of our own existence. That is why when we wake up, we know I slept. If there were absolutely no awareness in sleep, absolutely no awareness, we would be unaware of such a state. We would, in our experience, there would just be a seemingly unbroken succession of alternating states of waking and dream. We would not be aware of any gap. The fact that we are aware of a gap that we call sleep, means that we were aware in that gap. If we weren't aware while asleep, we wouldn't be aware that there was such a state at all. Some people think that we know our existence in sleep only by inference in the waking state, but that is not so. We clearly know without any reasoning. We know the fact that we were in a state in which we were not aware of anything other than ourselves. So since we know we were in such a state, obviously we were aware in such a state. So in sleep there is awareness, but not awareness of anything. And as I say, in the waking state, we interpret that as an awareness of nothing. But nothing obviously is a relative term. Nothing and something are two relative terms. Sleep, we are beyond this. This is made very clear by Bhagavan in various verses. Firstly, in verse 27 of Upadesha India, what he says in this verse is, Arivu ariyamayum atra arive arivahum. That means awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance, or awareness and non-awareness, is awareness. What he means by this is awareness in which there's neither knowledge of other things nor ignorance of other things is real awareness. So if we don't have knowledge of anything else, does that not mean that we're ignorant? But Bhagavan says, no, that state of awareness in which we neither have knowledge or awareness of other things, nor do we have ignorance or not an awareness of things. That alone is the real knowledge. Then he goes on to say, unme idu. That means this is the reality. This is what is real. And then he explains it in the last sentence, aribadaku ondru ille. That means there is nothing for knowing. So if we try to understand what he means here, that in a state that is devoid of ego, whether it's a state of manōlaya, which is a temporary dissolution of ego, as in sleep or coma or any such state, or in the state of jnana, which is manōnāśa, the permanent eradication of ego, in any state where ego is absent, where mind is absent, there's nothing to know there. There's nothing for knowing. Aribadaku ondru ille. Since there's nothing to know there, we cannot say it is a state of ignorance, because we can be ignorant only if there's something to know. But if there's nothing there, if there's nothing to know there, there's also nothing to not know there. So there's neither knowledge nor ignorance of anything else, because there is nothing else other than ourself in such states. So pure awareness is the awareness that is not only devoid of knowledge of any other thing, it's also devoid of ignorance of any other thing, because there's no other thing to know in the state of pure awareness. The state of pure awareness is the real state. It's what our real nature is pure awareness. So in that, since nothing other than ourself exists in such a state, nothing other than ourself actually exists at all. In waking and dream, other things seem to exist, but even when they seem to exist, they do not actually exist. So as Bhagavan says, for example, in the first sentence of the seventh paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, Yathatamai ulladu atmaswarupamandre. What actually exists is only atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa means, atma means oneself, swarupa means real nature. So the real nature of ourself is atmaswarupa. In other words, what we actually are, ourself as we actually are, that alone is what actually exists. So since that alone is what actually exists, all other things are just an appearance. As Bhagavan goes on to explain in that same paragraph, he goes on to say that world, soul, and God are appearances in Atmaswarupa. They are like the appearance of silver in a shell. They appear simultaneously, they disappear simultaneously. What actually exists is only Swarupa, only our own real nature. So we alone are what actually exists. So there is never anything other than ourselves for us to know. However, when we rise as ego, we thereby create the appearance of otherness, and we know other things. So in a state of sleep, we don't rise as ego, therefore nothing other than ourself exists, either to know or to not know. So it is a state beyond both knowledge and ignorance. That's what Bhagavan implies here. He also implies the same in verse 12 of Ulladu. But there's a build-up to verse 12, so it's useful to consider what he says in the verses prior to verse 12. In verse 10 of Ulladu, he says, leaving ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Leaving knowledge, that ignorance does not exist. Here the word vittu, which literally means leaving, it implies without. So without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Without knowledge, ignorance does not exist. The knowledge and ignorance he's talking about here is knowledge and ignorance of things other than ourselves. So this is what is called a dvandva, a dyad. On Tamil, in the previous verse, verse 9, Bhagavan describes it as irite, a pair of opposites. So knowledge and ignorance are a pair of opposites. Any pair of opposites, they are mutually dependent. Examples of pairs of opposites are knowledge and ignorance, awareness and non-awareness, existence and non-existence, life and death, happiness and misery. All these are pairs of opposites. Each member of this pair exists relative to the other one. So each is dependent on the other one. So without ignorance, there's no such thing as knowledge. And without knowledge, there's no such thing as ignorance. This is, as I say, it's not talking about knowledge or ignorance about ourselves. Here, Bhagavan is referring to knowledge and ignorance about anything other than ourselves. And then he goes on to say, only the knowledge or the awareness that knows oneself, who is the first, as to whom are knowledge and to whom are that knowledge and ignorance, is knowledge. Here, the word he uses for knowledge is arivu. It's the same word he used in verse 27 of Upadeshundya, which I just talked about. Arivu means both knowledge and awareness. So what he's saying here is, but the real awareness is only the awareness that knows oneself. And he describes oneself, who is the first? Who is the first here can be interpreted in two ways. It can mean who is the fundamental, ourself who are the fundamental reality, or it can mean ourself who are the first to rise. What is the first thing to rise is ego. So if we take it to mean the first to rise, then what he means by knows oneself, he means knows the reality of ego, not because we can't know ego as such, because ego doesn't actually exist. It only seems to exist. What is the reality of ego? So if we know what the snake is, what do we know? We know it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we know what ego is, we know it's not ego, but just pure awareness. So only that, so the main clause of this sentence, Tanne Arium Arive Arivu, that means only the awareness that is aware of oneself is awareness. So in other words, awareness of anything other than ourself is not awareness. And how do we know ourselves, or know ourselves or know the reality of ourselves? By investigating to whom are that knowledge and ignorance. That is, knowledge and ignorance of other things is for whom? Who is the one who knows other things? Who is the one who doesn't know other things? It is only ourself as ego. By investigating this ego, we thereby know the reality of ego. In other words, we know ourselves as we actually are, and that awareness or knowledge of ourselves as we actually are, that alone is real awareness. So that's what he says in verse 10. Then in verse 11, he says, not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. That is, whenever it's important to understand here when he says, not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance, we shouldn't take this to mean that it's okay to know other things, provided we also know ourselves. Because the implication in that he makes clear in the later part of this verse, that if we know ourselves, knowledge and ignorance about other things will cease to exist. So the reason we know other things is because we do not know ourselves. So not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. Besides, is it knowledge? That is, when he says besides, is it knowledge, it's very emphatic the way he says it in Tamil. Ayale arivadu ariyame means knowing other things is ignorance. Andri arivo, besides is it knowledge. That's a very emphatic way of saying it is not at all real, it is not at all knowledge or not at all real awareness. It is only ignorance. So he's very emphatic here, but knowing anything other than ourselves is not knowledge, it is just ignorance. And then he goes on to say, when one knows oneself, the support for knowledge and the other, knowledge and ignorance will cease. What he means by oneself, the support for knowledge and the other here means knowledge and ignorance. what is the support for knowledge and ignorance? It is ourself as ego. So when he says when one knows oneself, it means when one knows ego. But of course, there's no such thing as ego to know, because if we investigate ego, what we find is its underlying reality, which is pure awareness. So when he says when one knows oneself here, it implies when one knows the reality of oneself, the reality of ego. When we know what we actually are, and what we actually are is the reality of ego, which is the support for knowledge and ignorance. When we know that, knowledge and ignorance will cease. Why will knowledge and ignorance cease when we know ourselves? Because when we know ourselves as we actually are, ego will thereby cease to exist. And without ego, there's no knowledge or ignorance about anything else. And then in verse 12, he says in almost exactly the same words what he had said in verse 27 of Upadesha. That is, in the first sentence, he says, Arivu ariyamayum atradu arivu ame. What is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. In other words, real knowledge of true awareness is that which is devoid of both knowledge and ignorance of anything other than oneself. And then he goes on to say, that which knows is not real knowledge. What he's referring to as that which knows is ego. So he's saying here that ego is not real knowledge. Because ego is a false awareness of ourselves. As ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am, which is true, but we're not aware of ourselves as just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person. That is what is that is the defining characteristic of ego. As ego, we know ourselves as I am this body, and we consequently know other things. So ego is not the real knowledge. It's not the real awareness. Then he goes on in the next sentence to explain why our real nature is awareness. He says, since one shines without another for knowing or for causing to know, oneself is knowledge. When he says, since one shines without another, this is implying much the same that he implied in verse 27 of Upadesha when he said, but there's nothing for knowing. That is, for the pure awareness that we actually are, there is no other thing either to know or to not know. So since one shines without another for knowing or for causing to know, that is, there's no other thing either for us to know or for us to cause to be known. So we alone are the knowledge or awareness. So the real awareness is only ourself as we actually are, that is. And then he goes on to say, one is not a void, but that what we actually are is not a void. What we are is pure awareness. Pure awareness is not a void. It's devoid of knowledge and ignorance of anything other than itself, but that doesn't make it void. Pure awareness is actually the fullness of it's the fullness of Satchidananda, pure being, pure awareness, and pure happiness. And it's not a void, because if something is void, that means it's empty. But there has to be some other thing of which it is empty. But for pure awareness, there is no other thing. So it cannot be said to be empty. It is the fullness of itself. And then just to complete this series of verses where Bhagavan is explaining what is pure awareness, that he doesn't mention the term pure awareness here, but that is what is implied, that awareness that is devoid of knowledge or ignorance of any other thing, that is pure awareness. In verse 13, he says, Jnanamam tane me, oneself who is awareness alone is real. In the previous three verses, the term he was using for awareness was arivu, which is a Tamil word. Now he switched to a Sanskrit word here, jnanam. Jnanam means awareness or knowledge. So when he says oneself who is jnana, it means oneself who is awareness. It implies pure awareness. because our real nature is pure awareness. So oneself who is awareness alone is real. Then he goes on to say, nanabam jnanam ajnanamam, awareness which is various or many or manifold, is ignorance. In other words, the awareness that knows the existence of many things, the awareness that divides itself up into many separate knowledges, so to speak, that awareness is ignorance. When Bhagavan first composed this verse, he composed in a slightly different way. And instead of nanabam jnanam, awareness which is many, or which is various, which is manifold, he said nanabai kankindra jnana, which means the awareness that seizes many. That is, what actually exists is only one thing, namely ourself, who are awareness. But when we rise as ego, we see ourself, for one, as all this multiplicity. So that's why in that earlier version of this verse, he said, Nana by kankindra jnana, the awareness but sees as many. That is referring to ego, because ego is the awareness that sees the one thing that actually exists, namely ourself, as all this manyness. So that is ignorance. And then he goes on to say, poyam ajnaname, even that ignorance which is unreal, jnanamam tanne andri indru, does not exist except or besides oneself, who is knowledge. That is, we who are pure awareness, we are the base. So without ourself as pure awareness, ego cannot exist. So ego, which is the awareness that knows many things, which is therefore ignorance, is unreal, but it cannot exist apart from ourself, who are real, as he said in the first sentence. Then he gives an analogy to illustrate this. Anigal tam palabum poi, the multiplicity of ornaments is unreal. Mayam ponne andri undo. Does it exist apart from or besides gold, which is real? That is, gold is the substance, the ornaments of different forms. Without the substance, the forms cannot exist. So if you've got a variety of gold ornaments, you've got rings and bangles and necklaces and gold coins and tiaras and all sorts of different things made of gold. None of those, they're different forms, but in substance they are one. In substance they are nothing but gold. So none of those many different forms can exist independent of the substance, which is gold. In the same, that is an analogy he uses. So this multiplicity of this knowledge that is multiple, this awareness of multiplicity, cannot exist apart from the underlying reality, the substance, which is the pure awareness that is oneself. So coming back to the question, how this applies to the question is this pure awareness? That is the awareness we experience in sleep pure awareness? Yes, it is. The only, as I pointed out earlier, it's not correct to say that the awareness in sleep is knowing nothing, because there is not anything there for it to know. So we can talk about knowing nothing if there's something to know. But in sleep, there's nothing either to know or to not know. So sleep is a state that is beyond knowledge and ignorance, because there's no other thing either to know or to not know there. So that is the state of pure awareness. Sleep is a state of manōlaya. Manōlaya means it's a temporary dissolution of mind. So in a state of manōlaya, there is no mind at all. So because of the absence of mind, there is no differences, because all differences appear only in the mind. So sleep is a state in which there are no differences. So what is the difference between a state of manōlaya, like sleep, and the state of jnana, which is a state of manōnāśa? The only difference is that from the perspective of ego in waking and dream, sleep seems to be a temporary state, whereas the state of jnana is eternal. But there's no defect in sleep itself. The only seeming defect in sleep is that we seem to have come out of it. Other than that, there is no difference between sleep and the state of pure awareness, which is sometimes called turiya, the fourth. Because logically, there cannot be any difference, because differences exist only in the mind. So in a state that is devoid of mind, there cannot be any differences. So the difference we see between sleep on the one hand and the so-called turiya, the fourth state, the state of pure awareness on the other hand, is that sleep seems to us to be temporary, whereas the state of pure awareness is permanent. But this is only a difference that appears in the view of ourself as ego in the waking or dream state. In sleep, we do not experience any such differences. One more thing I'll say in this connection. People often say, then if the state of jnana is just like sleep, then what is sleep? Seems to be a totally a state of nothingness. It doesn't seem to there's nothing attractive for people with an outward going mind. Sleep seems to be a very unattractive state. Okay, we sleep every day. We all like to sleep. But do we want to sleep forever? Most of us would agree we don't want to sleep forever. That means we don't want jnana. But why sleep seems to be lacking in appeal, if we're very happy to go to sleep when we know we're going to wake up the next morning. But if we knew that we were going to go to sleep for all eternity, most of us would not relish the idea. That is because though we experience pure awareness in sleep, what we recollect is we are not able to recollect what the nature of that pure awareness, that the pure awareness that we experience in sleep is also pure happiness, infinite happiness, unlimited happiness. But it doesn't, from the perspective of the mind in waking and dream, sleep seems to be just a state of nothingness. That is because the same pure awareness that we experienced in sleep is here even now. But that is, pure awareness is what shines in us as our own being, I am. So even now we are aware I am, but we are not aware of I am as it actually is, because we're now aware of ourselves as I am this person. I am Michael, I am whoever. That is because we now experience ourselves as a body. Because we experience ourselves as this body, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. What shone in sleep was ourselves as we actually are. Since we do not know ourselves as we actually are now, we cannot know ourselves as we actually were in sleep. So sleep seems to us, from the perspective of waking, from the perspective of ego in waking and dream, seems to be a dull state, a state without any particular appeal. But because the same ignorance that is preventing us knowing ourself as pure awareness now is preventing us from knowing the nature of that pure awareness that we experienced in sleep. So sleep is actually a perfect state. It's only from a perspective of ego and waking and dream, but it seems to be imperfect because we seem to have come out of it. But as Bhagavan says, if we investigate ourselves as ego and thereby know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we are eternally asleep and that sleep is the perfect state. It's a state of infinite being, infinite awareness, infinite happiness. So that was a rather long answer to that question, but the reason I gave that long answer is to clarify that pure awareness is not knowing nothing. Pure awareness is beyond knowing or not knowing anything. It is just pure awareness. It's not awareness of anything. It's just pure awareness. I am pure awareness that is being. The next question. I'll first read the question and then I'll answer it. In Vishnu Sahasranama, it says a person can realize supreme reality through yoga by calming mental activities. I am just copying that verse here, and it's written in Roman script without diacritics. I'm not quite sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly, but what is written there is yoga vidam neta pradana pureshwaraha narasimha vapu sriman keshava purushottamaha. And then there's an explanation for that in brackets 18. So I don't know whether that means this is the 18th verse or what that 18 refers to. I'm not sure. Then it explains the word yogaha. In the verse, it was actually written as yoga. So I don't know if it's wrongly typed, but anyway, the explanation about yogaha. Yogaha is the one who is to be known or realized through yoga. And then the explanation, by withdrawing the sense organs from their objects of preoccupation, when the mind of the seeker becomes quietened, he is lifted to a higher plane of consciousness, wherein he attains yoga, meaning wherein he realizes the reality. At such moments of equanimity and mental quiet, yoga is attained. And then there's a quotation, samatvam yoga uchyate. That means equanimity is called yoga, or is said to be yoga. That is a quotation of that the last clause of verse 48 of chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. And then it goes on, since he is experienced through yoga, he's known as yogaha. And then the question is, so is it manōlaya or manōnāśa? Firstly, about the question that I've been asked, it begins by saying in Sahasranama, it says, sorry, in Vishnu Sahasranama, it says that a person can realize supreme reality through yoga by calming mind activities. I think that's not actually said explicitly in this passage of Vishnu Sahasranama, as far as I can see. This is the commentator's interpretation of it. So the question is, can we realize this supreme reality through yoga by calming mental activities? Well, this is what is taught by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra. The first Yoga Sutra, he says, he defines yoga as yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is restraining or stopping or the chitta vritti. Chitta vritti means mental activity. And then in the next sutra, he goes on to say, by this, one, I think he says one is established in Swarupa, or one sees Swarupa, or something to that effect. So the view of Patanjali, as expressed in Yoga Sutra, is that by stopping mental activity, by stopping chitta vritti, we can know Swarupa, we can know our real nature. However, this is not Bhagavan's teachings. Bhagavan made clear merely stopping mental activity will result not in manōnāśa, but in manōlaya. Manōlaya means a temporary dissolution of mind, whereas manōnāśa means a permanent dissolution of mind. Bhagavan explains this in verse 13 of Upadesha. In verse 11 and 12, he explains why restraining the breath or controlling the breath is a means to restrain the mind. But then he says in verse 13, dissolution is, the literal meaning is, I'll say the literal meaning and then I'll explain it. Dissolution is two, laya and nāśa, which what is lying down or subsided, meaning what is in laya, will rise. If its form dies, it will not rise. In other words, what he's saying here, when he says dissolution of two, he implies dissolution of mind is of two kinds, laya and nāśa. Laya means a temporary dissolution, nāśa means permanent dissolution or annihilation. Ileyetu uludu erum. What is ileyetu? It's very difficult to translate it. It's an adverbial participle of a verb from a Sanskrit, of a Tamil verb from a Sanskrit root, which means what it implies is what is in laya, or what is subsided, what is lying down, what is dissolved in laya is what it implies. Erum, it will rise. So what if we subside in laya, we will certainly rise again. But if its form dies, that in other words, if the mind is destroyed by nāśa, it will not rise. So the difference between laya and nāśa is laya is a temporary state and nāśa is a permanent state. What is the reason Bhagavan wrote this verse and put it in this particular place in Upadesha, what he's implying is that laya, that by restraining the breath, you cannot attain nāśa, you can only attain laya. He says this very explicitly in the 8th paragraph of Nana. He concludes that paragraph by saying, therefore, pranayama is only an aid to restrain the mind or to subdue the mind, but will not bring about manōnāśa. So we cannot achieve manōnāśa by merely by yoga or merely by pranayama, breath restraint, or other yoga practices. There's only one way to destroy the mind. That he makes clear in verse 14 of Upadesha, in which he says, Odaka valiye odungum ullate, vidakave ovari undipara, bium adonuru undipara. What that means is, valiye odaka valiye odungum ullate. That means the mind which will subside when the breath is restrained. Only when that, then he says, vidikave ovari. So ullate vidikave ovari. That mind which will subside, or which will be restrained when one restrains the breath, only when one sends that mind on the ovari, adun uruviyam, will its form perish. So what is this ovari? Or is the root of a Tamil verb that means to investigate or to know. So often Bhagavan uses the root of a verb in place of an adjectival participle. So ovari implies orumvari, the path of investigation, or the path of knowing. In other words, the path of self-investigation. So only when the mind is sent on the path of self-investigation will its form die. So what he implies here is only by means of self-investigation will the mind die. Bhagavan often used to comment about yoga, saying that in yoga they say to chitta-vritti nirodha, restraining the mental activity. But that's not a practical way to know oneself, because if you stop mental activity, what results is manōlaya. So the mind cannot, we cannot destroy the mind merely by stopping its activity. When we stop its activity, it subsides, but only in laya, not in nāśa. In order to bring about destruction of the mind, we need to understand what is the nature of mind or ego. That is, as Bhagavan explains in verse 18 of Upadeshundya, the root of the mind is ego, the thought called I. That is, mind is just, we use the term mind in a variety of different senses, but mind in its broadest sense, in which we use it, is a collective term which we use to refer to the totality of all thoughts. But the root of all thoughts is this one thought, I, because all other thoughts are jada. They are devoid of awareness. So they seem to exist only in the view of the first thought, I, namely ego. So other thoughts seem to exist only in the view of ego. Therefore, without ego, other thoughts can't exist. Therefore, what the mind essentially is just ego. And what is this ego? This ego is a false awareness of ourself. What we actually are is just the pure awareness I am. But as ego, though we're always aware I am, we're not aware just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person, I am so-and-so. So ego is a false awareness of ourself. Since it is a false awareness of ourself, it can be destroyed only by correct awareness of ourself. So it is only by knowing ourselves as we actually are that we can bring about the destruction of mind, manōnāśa. It may be objected here, but you said earlier, but in sleep, we know ourselves as we actually are. We know ourselves as pure awareness. Yes, we do. But why is it that the mind is not destroyed in manōlaya, in sleep or any other state of manōlaya, kevala nirvikalpa samadhi or coma or whatever, any state of manōlaya, the mind is not destroyed? Why is that? Because in all states of manōlaya, that manōlaya is brought about by some means other than self-investigation. Sleep, for example, is brought about by tiredness. When we're just too tired to continue all our mental activity, we subside along with all our mental activity. So in the case of sleep or any other state of manōlaya, first ego subsides, and only after ego subsides, what remains shiny is pure awareness. The same is the case with kevala nirvikalpa samadhi. By restraining the breath and by other yoga practices, yogis bring about kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, which is a state of manōlaya, because the mind subsides in that state without knowing its own reality. So it's only after the mind has subsided that the pure awareness shines forth. But that is putting the cart before the horse. We need to put the horse before the cart. So before the mind subsides, we need to know ourselves with pure awareness. Because in sleep or nirvikalpa samadhi, the mind is absent. If in a court, if a criminal, a murderer, say, is awarded the death sentence, that death sentence can be carried out only if the criminal is present. If the criminal has run away and is in hiding somewhere, though he's sentenced to death, he can't be killed because he's absent. Likewise, ego cannot be killed in a state of manōnāśa, a state of manōlaya, because it's absent. It's already absconded before the pure awareness shines forth. So in the state of waking or dream, while ego is present, ego needs to experience itself as pure awareness. But of course, ego cannot experience itself as pure awareness, because as soon as ego experiences itself as pure awareness, it ceases to be ego and remains as pure awareness, because pure awareness can never be an object of awareness. So what can know pure awareness is only pure awareness. But though ego cannot know itself as pure awareness, we as ego need to try to see what we actually are. If we see what we actually are, we will see that we are pure awareness, and thereby we will cease to be ego. So ego is destroyed only by experiencing itself as pure awareness. But as soon as it experiences itself as pure awareness, it ceases to be ego and remains as pure awareness. So this is the difference between manōlaya and manōnāśa. Manōlaya is brought about by various means, such as tiredness, or in the case of coma, it may be a head injury or a drug overdose or something. In the case of general anesthesia, it's because of a carefully controlled state of anesthesia brought about by various anesthetic drugs. In the case of Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it's brought about by pranayama and other yoga practices. But in order to bring about the destruction of the mind, we need to, we as ego or mind, before we subside in laya, we need to know ourselves as pure awareness. So it is only by self-investigation, by turning our attention away from all other things, back towards ourselves, but we can bring about the destruction of mind. So Bhagavan has made clear, merely stopping mental activity is not, it will bring about manōlaya, but it will not bring about manōnāśa. In order to bring about manōnāśa, the mind needs to be turned, our attention needs to be turned back within to know ourself alone. Only when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, our attention is thereby withdrawn from other things. When our attention is withdrawn from other things, it is we thereby cease to be aware of anything else, and we are aware of ourself alone. The state in which we are aware of ourself alone is the state of pure awareness. So it's only by the effort of the mind to turn its attention back to itself, mind or ego, to turn its attention back to itself, but the destruction of mind or ego can be achieved. So this is the difference between manōlaya and manōnāśa. There were several other questions, but I've actually spent a long time answering these two questions. So should I answer some more questions, Shalini, or would you like to, if people have asked questions in the chat box, maybe I should address those first.
There are two other questions which have come in the mail. What would you like to do?
Those two that came today, I would prefer to keep those for the next meeting, because that again, they're questions that require quite a detailed answer.
Okay. There's another one which I think you haven't received. It's let me just read it and you can decide whether you want to answer that today or...
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, in the ebook, The Paramount Importance of Self-Attention by Sri Sadhu Om, as recorded by Michael James, it says, and now I quote Michael James' first paragraph of the introduction below, between December 1977 and February 1980, I made rough notes of some of the things that I heard Sri Sadhu Om say either to me or to other friends or visitors. And many years later, these notes were found and read by a friend who then urged me to share them with other devotees, saying that they contain a wealth of ideas that would help anyone who is following the path of self-inquiry taught by Sri Bhagavan. So clearly, Michael says that between December 1977 and February 1980, he made rough notes of some of the things that I heard from Sri Sadhu Om. But this good book only mentions the period from December 1977, until 3rd November 1978. Is there another book recording? Is there another book recording the period after 3rd November 1978 until February 1918, up to February 1980? And if yes, how can we find it?
Okay. As I wrote there, the notes I wrote in those days, they were very rough notes. So I have been editing them and making them available. For the past more than 10 years now, it's been made available through the Mountain Path. So it's still an ongoing project. I think on the ashram website, I don't know, recently they changed their website, so I don't know if that's still available, but they did have a page of something about highlights from the mountain path, in which they gathered various articles from different periods. So I think they reduced this paramount importance of self-attention. They produced that in, I think, in three or four separate PDFs, that they collected articles, maybe about 10 articles or so in each of them. But so far, I think it's come to about 50 articles have appeared in the Mountain Path, and it's still an ongoing project. So all of those you can, if you go to a Mountain Path and look for go to the ashram website and look for the Mountain Path and go through the past issues for the past, I think it's come to about, if I can remember correctly, it's nearly up to 50 now. So it's for the past 12 years or so it's been going on. So that would be from maybe about 2012 onwards. In each Mountain Path, there is that is available. So I hope that's a useful answer to that. So
and there's just a second part,
yes,
which is quite short, which is, could Michael please explain the sense that Bhagavan is suggesting a possible nuance concerning the staged transition into self-realization, as opposed to the all-in approach, that is, once you get it, you've got it totally?
Well, yes, it is. Once you've got it totally. That is certainly the case. Bhagavan didn't teach, but it can be staged. That is, either we know ourselves as we actually are, or we know ourselves as I am this body. There's no stages in between. But though the actual annihilation of ego takes place in an instant, one moment you're alive, next moment you're dead. There's no half state of self-realization or half state of annihilation of ego. Practice is necessary. Bhagavan made it very clear practice is necessary because we still have very strong Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas means inclination to experience things other than ourselves. So long as these Vishaya vasanas, these are the seeds that sprout as likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on. So we still have a very strong outward-going inclination. So long as we have a strong outward-going inclination, we are not willing to surrender ourselves completely. Annihilating ego is complete surrender of ego. So until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely, we will not be willing to know ourselves as we actually are. So patient and persistent practice of self-investigation is required in order to weaken our Vishaya vasanas and strengthen our Satvasana. Satvasana means the inclination just to be, the inclination to hold on to our being and thereby to be as we actually are. So until the Satvasana is stronger than the totality of all Vishaya vasanas, we will not be willing to surrender ourselves completely. We will not be willing to subside. So practice is necessary. But that practice is just preparing us for the final moment when we let go of everything and merge back into our own being. So the final moment it's instantaneous. Up till then, it's all preparation. I think among the so-called neo-Advaita teachers, talk about not gradual and instantaneous, but they have some other term. I've forgotten what it is, but they give the impression that practice is that you don't have to practice anything. All you have to do is to see the reality. Yes, that's all we have to do is see the reality. Practice is necessary in order to make us willing to see the reality. Because what is the reality? The reality is ourself. But if we see ourselves as we actually are, we have to give up everything else. Bhagavan makes this clear in verse 26 of Ulladu Napadu, in which he says, Ahande undayin and atum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yabamam. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. So what does he mean by that? When he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence, everything here means all phenomena, all objects, all multiplicity comes into existence only when ego comes into existence. Why is that? Because all this multiplicity exists only in the view of ourself as ego. So when ego is absent, as for example in sleep, we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. When we rise as ego, we project all this multiplicity. So the multiplicity, all phenomena, depend for their semi-existence upon ego, in whose view they seem to exist. So if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. So this whole vast universe depends only upon ego, the knower of it. Without ego, there's no universe. That's why Bhagavan said, but this world seems to exist in waking and dream. In sleep, there's no world at all. There's no body, no world, no mind, nothing, because there is no ego. So if ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That's the second sentence of that. So everything, all phenomena depend for their semi-existence upon ego, the knower of them. Because they seem to exist only in the view of ego. Therefore, he says, ego itself is everything. That is, ego, what we see as all this multiplicity, we as ego are seeing ourselves as all of this. Just like in a dream, what is the dreamer seeing? The dreamer is seeing itself as the dream world. But there's no dream world independent of itself. So the dreamer is ego. So according to Bhagavan, this waking state is also a dream. So the dreamer of both these dreams, so the state that we recognize as dream and the state that we now mistake to be waking, the dreamer is ego. So without ego, there's no dream. So ego sees itself as this whole dream. So that's why he says, ego itself is everything. And then in the last sentence, he says, therefore, investigating what this is giving up everything. Investigating what this is means investigating what this ego is. Why is investigating ego giving up everything? Because, as he made clear in the previous verse, if we investigate ego, ego will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source. When ego thereby ceases to exist, everything ceases to exist. So until we are willing to surrender, to give up everything, to surrender all experience of multiplicity, and just to merge back into that state of pure awareness, which is our own being, and which is alone what is real, until we are willing to do so, until we're willing to give up everything, we will not be willing to go deep enough in this path of self-investigation. This path of self-investigation is simply a matter of turning our attention away from other things back towards ourselves. So as Bhagavan says in Anma Vidyā, this path is extremely easy, easier than any other path. This is the extremely easy path. But though it's extremely easy, why then does if it's extremely easy, why does it seem so difficult for us? We can logically understand, yes, attending to ourselves is the easiest thing of all things. If we can attend to other things, how much easier it is to attend to ourselves. But if we actually try to attend to ourselves, we find our attention keeps on slipping away towards other things. Why is that? Because we have so much Vichara Vasana, so much inclination to attend to other things, so much taste in attending to other things. So until we give up that inclination to experience anything other than ourselves, we cannot know ourselves as we actually are. So this is why practice, patient and persistent practice is necessary, because by practicing self-investigation, we are thereby weakening the Vishaya vasanas and strengthening Sattvasana. Because to understand this, we need to understand the nature of vasanas. Vasanas are our own inclinations, so they have no strength of their own. Whatever strength the vasanas seem to have is strength they derive from us. So how do vasanas derive their strength from us? To the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by any particular vasana, that vasana becomes strong. To the extent to which we refrain from being swayed by any particular vasana, that vasana becomes weak. So if when we are practicing self-attention, we are restraining ego, trying to turn ego within and restraining it thereby from going outwards. So the Vishaya vasanas are constantly making us feel inclined to go outwards. So when we turn our attention within and hold on to self-attention, we are thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by the Vishaya vasanas. The Vishaya vasanas thereby are gradually weakened, and the Sattvasana, the love to attend to our own being, is thereby strengthened. So practice is absolutely essential, but but the final result of this practice is instantaneous. When finally we are willing to let go, to turn our attention 180 degrees away from all phenomena, back towards ourselves, and thereby know ourselves just as pure awareness, that happens in an instant. And once that happens, that's permanent. Once ego is annihilated, it never rises again. In fact, when ego is annihilated, we will find there never was any such thing as ego. So the ultimate truth is ajata. We had never risen as ego in the first place. But in order for that to become our experience, we need to persevere in this practice of self-investigation, turning our attention back towards ourselves and trying to hold on to our own being, until we finally let go of everything and emerge forever back into our being. So I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
Michael,
yes.
Can I expand the question?
Yes.
This questions appears when we with Ramana group were reading a text from a man called Gindaram or something like this. I forgot. Gambiram Seshaya.
Gambiram Seshaya. Okay, right, yes.
Okay, so it was a little bit problematic with a lot of strange, at least for me, ideas with which
yes.
I couldn't agree.
Okay,
and,
yes.
Can I just find the passage where this problem starts?
Yes.
Because, okay. As one continues to abide as the self, the experience I am the Supreme Spirit grows and becomes natural, etc., etc. So he has another kind of ideas that you are abiding as a self, etc., and you are growing in this experience. And we were thinking that it contradicts with the main teachings of Bhagavan, where if you are experience yourself as a self, you become annihilated, yes, because you never been since the beginning.
Okay.
But this person somehow has evolutionary ideas or something like this.
Okay. It's important to understand the context of this work. That is, I cannot say precisely, but as a rough estimate, I would say possibly 10% that work is a work called Vichara Sangraham. I would say about 10% of that is original teachings of Bhagavan, and 90% of it comes from other sources. How this work came into existence was in the early years of the 20th century, that's around about 1902, 1903, possibly a little bit after Shiva Prakasham Pillai asked for questions that later became Nana, this devotee, Gambiram Sesha, came to Bhagavan. But they were very different devotees. When Shiva Prakasham Pillai came to Bhagavan, his first question was, Swami, who am I? So he was so well attuned to Bhagavan, and he just wanted to know, who am I and how can I know myself as I actually am? So what came out, that Bhagavan's answers that came out became this very, very precious work, Nana, who am I? Gambiram Sesha came from a different perspective. He had read various books on spirituality, including Vivekananda's books, various books of Vivekananda, which in those days were just hot off the press. Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma, various books of Vivekananda, but not only books by Vivekananda, various English books of supposedly on Vedanta. I think maybe some of them were also Theosophical Society publications. But we don't know exactly what all the books were, but definitely some were Vivekananda's books. So he had difficulty understanding these books. So he brought these books to Bhagavan and asked Bhagavan to explain. So in those days, Bhagavan wasn't talking much. So he summarized the meaning of those, of the various portions that Gambiram Sesha wasn't able to understand. Bhagavan summarized them in Tamil. So Gambiram Sesha gathered these notes of what the explanations written by Bhagavan, but these are just, Bhagavan is just summarizing in Tamil the meaning of what is written in those English books. So it's not, that's why most of it is not Bhagavan's teachings. But while doing so, Bhagavan also added his own explanations. So like Nana, this wasn't published for many years. Gambiram Sesha, I think he was an older devotee. He passed away after some time. And either his brother or his nephew or someone wrote these notes to Ramanashram in the 1920s and gave to Bhagavan. And Swami Natyanananda was interested in these, so he started going through these notes, and he saw some things were some useful things were there. So seeing his interest in them, Bhagavan said, oh, why don't you edit them into a form? So Natyanananda edited them. First, he edited them in a question and answer form, because that was the simplest form. But he wasn't satisfied with that. So he then rearranged them in the form of an essay. But I think in that essay, he decided many things. He decided to omit many things. Yeah, he had originally done it in 8 sections, the final section being mukti. But some other devotees, they said, oh, but why you've omitted so many things? You've not included anything about Ashtanga Yoga or Ashtanga Jnana. What I think, the Ashtanga Yoga, then Jnana Ashtangam, and Sannyasam. And so they added things afterwards. Definitely this Yoga Ashtanga and Jnana Ashtanga were in the notes, but Natyanananda, in consultation with Bhagavan, had decided to omit them. Other devotees added them. And they also added, in the earlier parts of the book, they added portions that Natyanananda, in consultation with Bhagavan, had decided to omit. So the final result is a mishmash of, particularly the first section, 1 or 2 sections in the essay version are very useful. And there are some very useful things here and there throughout the work. But we need to bear in mind that 90% of it is not Bhagavan's teachings. 10% is Bhagavan. This is only an estimate. I've never tried to, it's very difficult. I mean, we can, if we read it carefully, we can make out what are Bhagavan's own original ideas and what are ideas that come from elsewhere. So as a rough estimate, I would say about 10% is Bhagavan's ideas, 90% is simply what Bhagavan paraphrased in Tamil of what was written in English books. Does that help to clarify the context?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
It's not only, but in the 90%, not only is the content not Bhagavan teaching, even the way in which ideas are expressed is not natural, the natural way in which Bhagavan expresses ideas. But the thing about
sometimes
Bhagavan,
it's opposite of his ideas, yes?
Yes, yes.
We have opposite of his ideas.
Yes, yes, yes. Because the thing with Bhagavan, he's completely impartial. If you bring him, supposing you bring a book on some philosophy, so maybe some Advaita, a dualistic interpretation of Vedanta, for example, if you bring Bhagavan that and ask him, Bhagavan, will you explain this to me? He'll explain it to you what's said there. And if you ask him, will you write it for me in Tamil, because I can't understand this English, he'll write it. So Bhagavan is completely impartial, but we need to understand what is the true teachings of Bhagavan. So this Vichara Sangraham, unfortunately, in the Tamil book, Bhagavan's collected works in Tamil, it comes right at the end. But when Arthur Osborne compiled an English collected works, he put this Vichara Sangraham at the very beginning. Because obviously he liked those ideas, even though they are not actually at all, most of it is not representative of Bhagavan's teachings. So it's very misleading to have it at the beginning of collective works.
But then we have also these ideas about human evolution in Sadhu Om's books, yes, about different stages of human being.
Yeah, there are all sorts of ideas are there. But
yeah, this is from him. This was not Bhagavan idea. Yes?
Yeah. It's not even Gambhira Sesha's ideas. Gambhira Sesha brought books in which he read things. So as I say, I think some of the books may have been theosophical books. So, you know, the theosophists, they had all sorts of ideas. They were mixing up Buddhism and Vedanta and esoteric Christianity, and they were making a mishmash of everything. So a lot of the ideas there are not represented. In fact, there's one thing there, this thing about Ashtanga Jnana, that is yoga. We know there are 8 angas, 8 limbs of yoga. But I've not yet been able to find out where this Ashtanga Jnana comes from. Someone must have had that idea, but you don't usually read that in any book about jnana, yoga or anything. You don't read about the eight limbs of jnana yoga. But it came from some books. It's not Bhagavan's idea at all.
So also Sadhu Om's idea of evolution is Sadhu Om's idea, not Bhagavan's. Sadhu Om's, yes.
Evolution.
Because he also talks about different kind of understanding of different people and school of bhakti, etc.
Oh, that is, Sadhu Om is correctly reflecting Bhagavan teaching. What he's explaining there is different levels of bhakti. It's not. Yeah, you can say evolution, but it's not exactly evolution. It's
deepening of understanding, let's say.
If you observe the world, what are most people seeking? Most people are seeking, they're seeking happiness outside themselves. So at the crudest level, the philosophy of the crudest type of mind is might is right. I want this, I want that. And it doesn't matter how I get it, I will get it in whatever way I can. There are people in the world like that, people who don't care at all about what harm they're doing to others. They just want to get what they want to get. The Genghis Khans and the Hitlers and the Napoleons and the Stalins and such people, they are just ruthless. They want what they want. And there are many people like that. More refined than that, there are people who think, yes, I want all these things, but I have to get it in a righteous way. That is why the Vedas begins with all the Vedic rituals. Vedic rituals are a way of getting pleasures in this world and the next, but within the constraints of dharma, within the constraints of certain principles of behavior. So you go from a very ritualistic type of religion. Then it gets more refined, where you're not depending only upon your own karmas, you're depending on the grace of God. In the Vedic rituals, it's got nothing to do with God. Though they're making offerings to the gods, they think if I do this ritual correctly, it has to give this result. That is implied if you read the Upagatam, the verses that Bhagavan selected as preliminary verses for Upadesha, the verses, when Murugan was narrating that story, you'll see it is said there, those rishis in the Dharakavana, they believed there was no God except karma. Karma te andri kadavalile ennum. That is the philosophy of Purva Mimamsa. The very first verse of Upadesha, Bhagavan is repudiating that. So there are these different levels. And then from the mere ritualistic level, where you believe only in karmas, then you come to a higher level when you begin to understand, no, there is a higher power. It's only by the grace of God that I can get all that I want. I mean, you begin worshipping God. But people who have many desires, they worship God in many forms. And as their devotion gets more refined, they come to devotion to one form. And then finally, their devotion for external things, they begin to understand, but I am praying to God for this or that, and God is granting my prayers. So how much greater is the giver than the gifts? So God is greater than anything I ask for him. So isn't it foolish to be asking God for this or that? Shouldn't I seek God himself? If God is able to give me all these good things, he must be greater than all these good things he gives me. So then the devotion evolves from the devotion for that if we worship God for what we can get from God, that's not true devotion to God. That's devotion to the things we can get from God. That's called Vishaya Bhakti. That is devotion to the objects that we can get from God, the benefits we can get from God. Then we switch over to, I don't want anything from God. I just want God alone. So what Sadhu Om explains there, Bhagavan didn't explain it in so much detail, but it's implicit there in so many of his teachings. And it's implicit in Vedanta, for example. Why are there so many different interpretations of Vedanta? Because different interpretations are to suit people at different stages of spiritual development. In talks, it's recorded when Swami Yogananda, the person who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi and who went to America and started the Self-Realization Fellowship, in the 1930s, he returned to India for a visit, and he came to Bhagavan. And he asked Bhagavan, what teachings are to be given for the uplift of the masses? And Bhagavan simply said, teachings cannot be given en masse. The teaching has to be according to the taught. So different teachings are appropriate for people at different levels. This is why we can see, for example, in books like Talks and Day by Day, when Bhagavan answers questions, he's often not giving his pure teachings. He's often giving it, he's giving teachings that are tailored to suit the needs of each individual questioner. So what Sadhu Om is saying there, it's not a new idea of Sadhu Om, it's just a fact that we do all go through different stages of spiritual development till we finally come to this stage where we are seeking to give up all our desires and attachments and lose ourselves in our source. That is the highest stage of bhakti. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Michael. By the way, in your conversation with Sadhu Om, there are a few very beautiful ideas. I just would like, if you have time, to expand a little bit.
Yeah.
But Bhagavan is a very skillful surgeon, and so he knows the right speed at which to change our outlook. If we are going too fast, he sometimes has to disconnect the current for a while, which he does by making us feel disinterested in practicing self-attention. So we have this idea of dark night of the soul, that when Bhagavan takes us and works with us, our nature, sometimes we are disconnected and we are feeling that we never understand whatever. Can you expand a little bit?
That is what is the driving force on the spiritual path. It is the love to know and to be what we actually are. That, as Bhagavan said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. Bhakti simply means the love. But we still have many desires for things other than ourselves. So sometimes we are sometimes we're very focused on this path. Sometimes we find our mind gets dissipated by so many. It may seem that our mind gets dissipated by external circumstances. Certain things may happen in our life, but seem to draw our attention outwards. But ultimately, it's not, nothing external can obstruct us. All the obstacles come from within. So as Bhagavan said, if we follow this path, all the dirt that is inside has to come out, because only by bringing the dirt to the surface of the mind can we get rid of it. The dirt means all these Vishaya vasanas. So we all at times get carried away by our Vishaya vasanas. And then after we carried away for a while, then we come back, oh, no, I shouldn't allow my mind to go off in that direction. Let me return and try to hold on to my being. So, but as Bhagavan said, the whole spiritual path, it's a battle within our own will. In Guru Vachaka Kavai, there's a verse in which he says, all the stories that are told in the Puranas about the battles between the gods and the demons, this is all what is going on in the heart of every spiritual aspirant, between the Vishaya vasanas, the vasanas that are drawing the mind outwards, and the Satvasana, the love to turn back within. So this battle is going on in the heart of any spiritual aspirant. Sometimes we get more carried away by our Vishaya vasanas, but after we're carried away, then we recognize that by following these Vishaya vasanas, we're not going to get what we want. We're not going to be happy. So we turn our attention back towards ourselves and try to. So it's a battle within the heart of each one of us. I think that is what the Christian mystics like St. John of the Cross, it's that internal battle that he's talking about when he refers to the dark night of the soul.
And then Sadhu Om talks a little bit about Atma Vichara, but in a different style, that we don't have to do it all the time, but we have to rest in order to hit again and again and again.
Yeah, that was something that's a practical piece of advice. If you're always trying to hold on to self-attentiveness all the time, and if you don't have enough love for it, after some time, you'll be slipping away from it. So sometimes it's better just to relax. Pick up a book of Bhagavan's teachings, read again, and re-enthuse yourself to go back within. And he gives an analogy. If you've got a scale measuring how much pressure you're pushing, if you try and push that and maintain the pressure, slowly, your pressure will get less. But if you relax and then press again firmly, you'll apply more pressure. So sometimes the intermittent attempts are more effective than trying continuously.
How do you handle disappointment or for say, and I know you said faith and trust that everything is going to be fine because Bhagavan said so. That is beautiful and that's very encouraging. But sometimes impatience kicks in, I want it now kicks in, and of course it's ego. How in your personal journey, that kind of yearning to know it all and not know it. Whatever that you say, the final thing, like the death, the suicide, yearning for that, and disappointment or whatever. How did you handle?
It's very hard to give general answers, because we're all going through a journey, and how we handle the various challenges we face on this journey, each challenge has to be handled in its own way. So we can't just give general. Ultimately, we know what is the aim in Bhagavan's teachings. Our aim is the solution to all our problems is to know ourselves as we actually are. The means to know ourselves as we actually are is to turn our attention within. So that is what we should be. We should be trying, by whatever means we find most effective, to keep our attention turned within as much as possible. The individual challenges we face, each one we have to face it and deal with it. There's no general answer that can be given to these things. We just need to be one-pointed, but we know what is the ultimate solution to all these problems is to turn our attention back within. So whatever difficulty we face, we should be trying to turn our attention back to ourselves. Who is this I who feels all these difficulties? To whom do all these difficulties appear? So that's probably not an adequate question to your answer to your question, but that's the best I could do is when such a general question is asked.
No, I'm talking about difficulties, not worldly, but difficult in the sense of wanting that final thing that you mentioned.
Yes, these are all
be one with yourself.
All difficulties ultimately are difficulties created by our own mind. Whether wanting anything other than our own being is a problem. If we want nothing other than our own being, we'll subside back into our being. So whether we call the problems as worldly problems or spiritual problems, it's all ultimately mind-generated problems. And the mind is the problem. And the solution is to stop letting the mind go outwards, to turn it back within. If we're impatient, or when is this moksha going to come? When is this jnana going to come? Who is it who's impatient? If we're thinking about when is it going to come, we are looking outwards, but we're looking to the future. Who am I? We need to be investigating who am I here and now. Let's not worry about who we're going to be in the future or who we were in the past. Who am I here and now? So we need to become more and more centered on the center, which is the center being the heart, ourself, our own being. And then we'll be less and less troubled by all these thoughts of impatience or dealing with problems. Problems come and problems go. That's the nature of this embodied existence. That's the nature of samsara. But who is this I who's experiencing all these problems? For whom is this samsara? Not just merely asking the questions. That these questions are to direct our attention back to. That's what we need to be investigating. Who is this I who's impatient? Who is this I who feels, oh, I'm not making any progress? Who is this I who's concerned about making progress? So, Shalini, should we?
Yes, there are quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, sorry.
So the first one is, what was the main idea of Sadhu Om and Sri Ramana Vazi versus Sadhana Saram? Who were the target audience?
Ramana Vazi was mostly compiled from notes people have made of answers that Sadhu Om gave them, or from letters that he wrote to people who were asking questions. So you can see from the breadth of topics that he covers in the book, how many different topics he's dealing with is because people raise questions about so many different things. They raised questions about God and world, about karma, about bhakti, about this and about that. So it was all originally answers that he gave to. It wasn't a book that he sat down to write. It was a book that was compiled from answers that he had given over the years. And likewise, Sadhana Saram is a collection of verses. Most of those verses were also written in answer to people's questions. So who is the target audience? Basically, anyone who's trying to follow Bhagavan's path. Some parts of those books will be of more interest to us than other parts, because different people have different approach this subject from different angles. But the core is the practice of self-investigation. In fact, when this book, Partha Sri Ramana, or the Tamil original, Ramana Maharshi, when it was first published, that is, before it was published, this person called Dr. Santanam had collected so many notes that people had taken of answers that Sadhu Om had given them, and notes that he himself had taken, and also letters that Sadhu Om had written to people. He had collected all of these, and he gave them to Sadhu Om and said, please form these into a book. So Sadhu Om originally just formed a short book, which was just the original 8 chapters, which were shorter than they are in the present edition. More things were added later. And he omitted all the things about God and world and bhakti and karma, because he thought if we focus on the main teachings of Bhagavan, all these things it's less necessary. But when Dr. Santanam published the book, he put on the cover page and on the title page, Mudal Bhagam, first part, because he wanted Sadhu Om to write about all those other subjects. And Sadhu Om said, what have you done? Why have you put first part? This is enough. And he said, no, people, you've given these answers because people ask these questions about these subjects. So these are also important, and they're all related to the core subject. So the later part became the second part, but Sadhu Om later said it shouldn't be part 1 and part 2. The actual main book is the first part. The second part is just a supplement. That's why as per the wishes of Sadhu Om, in the more recent editions of both in Tamil and English, it is the main book is called Sri Ramana Maharshi. The second part is called Anubandham, or supplement, to show that it's supplementary.
There's sort of 2 just informative questions. Can do this very quickly. It says that my understanding is that Michael was in charge and continued working with what Sadhu Om and Muruganar left behind. Who is responsible for Sadhu Om and Muruganar's artifacts now?
Let us say it's been taken out of my hands by forces beyond my control. Yes, he did leave it with me, but so long as I was there in Tiruvannamalai, I was able to manage these things. When I left it in the hands of people who I had taught what I had learned from Sadhu Om about how to continue the work. But those people passed away, and now there's a younger generation of people, and things have slipped out of my hands, and I no longer have any, well, basically I've been denied access. When I went to Tiruvannamalai last time, I was hoping to, some friends of mine had arranged for a powerful scanner to have everything scanned. Obstacles were raised. It was basically, I was denied access, which is Bhagavan's Leela. Who can say why that has happened? So now it's in the hands of people who don't know what to do with it, which is unfortunate. But these are, who knows why Bhagavan allows things to happen the way they happen. Murugan's manuscripts, many of them were given to the ashram archives, but I have reason to believe that many important parts of Murugan's manuscripts have actually been lost, because when Murugan had written, I mean, the unpublished verses of Murugana at the time of his death were about 14,000 unpublished verses. So Sadhu Om was compiling these as a series of volumes called Ramana Jnana Bodham, which were published by the Ramana Kendra in Delhi with financial assistance from the government, from the Department of Education of the Government of India. And I can't remember how many volumes were published in Sadhu Om's lifetime. I think it was about 6 or so, but everything, Sadhu Om had told me how everything was to be done, so we were able to continue and complete that. But we had a very careful indexing system, because Murugana, for many of the verses, he had written what was called Karaturai. Karaturai is, he had written a summary meaning of the verse. And for some verses, he'd written a more detailed explanation for the verse. But Professor Swaminathan, who was publishing it on behalf of Delhi Kendra with the help of the government of India, he said, we haven't received sufficient funds for publishing all of these, so let's at least publish the verses. Those explanations given by Murugana, they can be kept for later. So we had 2 copies of every verse. So we had a cross-referencing system. When we removed the prose explanation from the verses, when cutting and pasting the press manuscripts, we put references to where the verses were from, where they were available with the prose. But those press manuscripts were a very important part of the indexing system. And I believe those were all discarded after I left. After I left, and some of the friends who were close to me, people felt it's just taking up unnecessary space. And I've never received an adequate explanation what happened to those. So, and then everything was given to whatever remained was given to Ramanashram. So I don't know how much has actually survived of Murugana's works. Sadhu Om's manuscripts, I believe they're all intact, but nobody has any access to them now except the people who are controlling it, which is out of my hands.
I think another question is, why did Michael leave Thiruvannamalai after 20 years? I mean, that's quite fascinating.
As they would say in Tamil, Tale Vidi. Tale Vidi means, Tale means head, Vidi means fate. What is written, because it is believed that Brahma writes our fate on our forehead. So it was my destiny to leave. When I was there, all the time I was there, I thought I was going to live all my life there. But destiny took me away under various circumstances. So, yeah, Bhagavan obviously had other plans for me. So these manuscripts, which are no longer now under my control, which I don't even have adequate access to, that's also Bhagavan's doing. So he knows what he's going to do with these things. He knows what is to survive and what is to be lost.
Thank you, Michael, because Ramana Maharshi is such a eye-opening, and then you are able to release the 3rd edition of it. It was so clear. We don't need any other book to read. And the original work from Murugana, Sadhu Om, and you, it makes so much sense. I'm so glad you are existing. Whatever you contributed, I would like to personally thank you for that.
Well, it's all Bhagavan's doing. It's Bhagavan wrote Uladu Napadu and all his beautiful works using his leaky old pen. When people offer Bhagavan very fine Schaefer pens, Parker pens, he would say, oh, give to the office. They've got so many important things to write. And for Bhagavan, your pen is not so good, it's leaking. Oh, this is okay, good enough for me. So Bhagavan is very partial to using very imperfect instruments to do his work. So all thanks is due to Bhagavan, not to the imperfect instruments.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next question is, if the spiritual life depends on which type of asana sway us, and love of turning within to the sense of I am is the practice, is there anything that could be said about cultivating the love to turn within? The practice seems to depend on this love. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we can cultivate the love to turn within by trying to turn within. The more we turn within, the more we will be strengthening that sattvasana and weakening the Vichara vasanas. So that's why Bhagavan was constantly emphasizing the need for practice, constant practice, persistent practice. When Bhagavan was asked, what is the sign of progress? He said, the only meaningful sign of progress is perseverance. Because if we're persevering, we're moving in the right direction. If we're not persevering, then we're not progressing. So the persistence in this practice is the only way.
The next question is directing the attention to the space between thoughts the same as self-investigation?
What is the space between thoughts? If you understand that you yourself are what shines in the space between thoughts, it's not that we're attending to the space between thoughts. What is it that exists and shines in that space? It is only I. So attending to I it's just another way of saying the same thing. Any thought is an attention paid to something other than ourselves. When we're not attending to anything other than ourselves, what remains shining? We ourselves. So we need to attend to that. That doesn't mean that we simply stop thoughts, because if we simply stop thoughts, we slip into a state of manōlaya. That is why the key to self-knowledge is self-attentiveness. That's why Bhagavan said, when he was asked to define what is Atma Vichara, in Nana, he gives a very clear and simple definition. Sada kalamum manate atma vilve tirupatikutan atma vicharam endrupaya. That literally means the name Atma Vichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself. Keeping the mind on oneself means keeping our attention on ourselves. So attending to ourselves, that is the key. Merely stopping thoughts, as is the aim in yoga, is not sufficient because it will result in manōlaya. So the yoga can lead to self-investigation. I mean, it can lead to self-knowledge only if we include the practice of self-attentiveness in it. There's no other way to know what we actually are other than to attend to ourselves. So you can meditate on anything, but if you meditate on anything other than yourself, it takes you away from yourself. If you meditate on yourself, it'll take you back to yourself. It's as simple as that. So we need to decide, what is our aim? Do we seek to know anything or to experience anything other than ourselves? If so, there are all sorts of yogas and tantras and different paths are there for experiencing all sorts of wonderful things maybe. But if our aim is to know what we actually are, the only way is to attend to ourselves. If you want to see the sun, the only way is to look at it. If you want to see who am I, the only way is to look at ourselves. In other words, attend to ourselves. Because we are not an object, we can't be known by any of the senses. We can't be known by anything other than attention. That power of attention, that chit shakti, has to be turned back within. Chit shakti means the power of awareness. By directing our chit shakti away from ourselves, we produce all of this. By turning that chit shakti back to face ourselves alone, we dissolve all of this and we remain as we actually are. Bhagavan's teachings are so simple, but so very deep and radical.
The next one is, when we see in your translations that you add inverted commas or single quote signs, especially to the pronoun I, as in the thought called I, which I think aren't there in the Tamil original, do the inverted commas try to represent the I is aware? In paragraph 5 of Nanyar, where you translate whatever I is, that rises in this body as I, that alone is the mind. Or later, if one investigates in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, or in verse 22 of Upadesh Undiyar, and many more, since body, mind, intellect, life, and darkness are all jara and asat, they are not I, which is sat.
So why do I add inverted commas? It's not essential to do so, but usually if we're referring to, usually we use I as the first person pronoun referring to ourselves. But so if we were to use it, in English, we wouldn't say attend to I, we'd say attend to me. But so the inverted commas are there because I mean, I and me both refer to the same thing, but I is the nominative case, me is the accusative case. So if you attend to something, that's what you attend to should be in the accusative case. But because it's just a use of language, that's all. The inverted commas are not essential. If you prefer to read it without inverted commas, that's fine. Sometimes when I've omitted inverted commas, thinking it to keep it simple, not even including the inverted commas, people say, oh, why don't you put the inverted commas there? What's the difference? It really, whether the inverted commas are there or not, is not essential. I means I, there's only one I. That same I, but when it remains as it is, in its pure condition, is called pure awareness. That same I, when mixed and conflated with adjuncts, is called ego, but I is always one. You see, I say I is one. If I were to say it in normal English, I'd say I am one. So we're using I in a, though we're referring to the same thing, we're using the word in a slightly different sense when we say I is one. So I mean, language is always imperfect. We are, particularly for this subject, language will always, there's no perfect way of explaining that which is beyond words and thoughts. So language is just a tool for pointing out. So I wouldn't attach too much importance to the inverted commas there. It has no great, it has no great significance. It's just a way of trying to express it more clearly. But there's no perfect way of expressing it clearly, because what we are trying to express is that which is beyond thoughts and words.
The next question is, when I visited Tiruvannamalai recently, I met a senior devotee who has lived near the ashram for years. They mentioned no longer going for Giri Pradakshina, but instead doing a Pradakshina to Bhagavan's Samadhi, seeing it as sufficient. Given Bhagavan's strong recommendation for Giri Pradakshina, how should one approach this perspective?
When we are young enough and have the physical ability to walk around the hill, that is very good to do, because that's what Bhagavan did, and that's what Bhagavan, we know from so many devotees, Bhagavan very much encouraged that. But when we get older, we may not be able to, it's quite a long walk. It's about 8 miles, 13 kilometers. And nowadays it's not as it was. When I went back there this last December, I expected to see things change, but I didn't anticipate how much things have changed. But back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, when I used to go round the hill every day, most of the road was just still a long portion from the Chengan Road up to the I think it's called the Adayo Road. All that portion through Adianamalai was just a dirt track. It was we used to refer to it as Manpade, the mud road. Even the northern part of the hill, the road was very quiet. Occasional vehicle would come along. The most common vehicle would be the old bullock cart. But now, almost the whole way around the hill, there are houses and shops and temples, and it's just changed so much, and the whole thing has been paved and made. The first night I was there, when I returned in December, I went round the hill at night, and for most of the route, I couldn't see the hill at all, because there are street lights all the way. And with the street lights, it obstructs the view of the hill. Whereas I remember it used to be very quiet, very peaceful. You could go round the hill at night, whether it was moonlight or even if there was no moonlight, you could still see the hill. And it was so quiet and peaceful in both. It's now changed, but it's still, Arunachala remains Arunachala. So going round to the extent possible is good. If it's no longer possible, for one reason or another, either because the body is older or more infirm or whatever, obviously the next best is to go round Bhagavan Shrine. Then people say, does that mean going round the hill is superior to going round Bhagavan Shrine? No, for me, it's the same. Whether I'm going round Bhagavan Shrine or whether I'm going round the hill, it is the same.
Okay. The next question is question on sleep. It says, in the book of Lakshman Sharma on Uladu Narpadu, it is explained that in sleep, ego exists but is merged in Ananda Kosha or sheet of bliss. Thus, ego experiences bliss during sleep, and it is not possible to attain self-realization, as it is a short experience of the Ananda Kosha and not a state of self. How can we reconcile this with the statement that sleep is a non-ego state? Thank you.
Yes, well, this is, I didn't know Lakshman Sharma had written like that. That is very different, but very different ways of explaining the same thing. Bhagavan is very, very explicit, but in ego, there's no, for example, in verse 20, wait a second, I'll just get it, verse 21, I think it is, of Upadesh Undiya. Let me just get it. Yes, it's verse 21. Nanenub sotporul amadu nalame nanatra tukatumundi para namadi me nikatalundi para. What he says in this verse, he's referring to the previous verse, in which he said, but in the place where I here refers to ego, in the place where ego merges, that the one appears spontaneously as I am I. That itself is the whole. Then he goes on to say, that is, referring to what he was talking about in previous verse, that is as at all times the substance of the word called I, because of the exclusion of our non-existence, even in sleep, which is devoid of I. When he says devoid of I, it doesn't mean completely devoid of I, because he says, but that is always the substance of the word called I. Since he says, Nam enam sotporul, nam adu nalame. Nalame means always. So I always shine. So what is it that is absent in sleep? The I that is absent in sleep is ego. So when he says, nanatra tukotum, I which is that is in sleep, which is devoid of I, that means devoid of ego. in the first paragraph of Nana, the first sentence of the first paragraph of Nana, he says, Manamatra Nidrayal, in sleep which is devoid of mind. So according to Bhagavan, in sleep there is no ego, no mind, nothing. However, in classical Advaita, it is often explained that in sleep, all the other, that is, there's a way, this is part of a particular way of explaining things. The 5 sheaths are sometimes classified into 3 bodies: the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. The gross body is the Annamaya kosha, the sheath composed of food, in other words, the physical body. The subtle body consists of Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, and Vijnanamaya kosha. In other words, the life, the mind, and the intellect are called subtle body. And the will, or Anandamaya kosha, is called the causal body. And it is, in some texts, it is explained, in waking, it is the body is the gross body. In dream, the body we experience is the subtle body, whereas in sleep, it's the causal body. That's how it's sometimes explained. This explanation is inconsistent with Bhagavan's teaching, because according to Bhagavan, waking and dream are waking is also dream. There's no substantive difference between waking and dream. So Bhagavan sometimes used to say, but now you say the body in dream is a subtle body, but while you're dreaming, it appears to be just as gross, just as physical as this body. So there's actually no difference between them. So different explanations are given to suit people of different levels of spiritual maturity. One of the questions people often ask about sleep: if mind or ego is completely absent in sleep, how does it rise again in waking? So a simple explanation that is given to people is that in sleep, the mind remains there, mind or ego remains there in the subtle seed form as the causal body, or Anandamaya kosha. But that explanation is actually unnecessary, because that explanation is given in answer to the question of why does ego rise again from sleep? In other words, what is causing ego to rise again? Because they're looking for a cause is given. It's the causal body. It's the Anandamaya kosha, which consists of all the vasanas. But how can vasanas exist in the absence of ego? According to Bhagavan, there's no cause for the rising of ego. That's why he says in verse 26 of Uludunapadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That everything includes all cause and effect. So if we want to find a first cause, the first cause is ego. There's nothing that precedes ego other than our own being, and our own being doesn't cause anything because it is just being. So ego is the first cause. So we can't find any cause why ego came into existence. Another reason why we can't find any reason why ego came into existence is if we investigate ego, we will find that it has never actually come into existence. There's no such thing as ego at all. But people want explanations. So explanations are given to satisfy people. But the same classical Advaita in which this explanation is given, other explanations are given which are not consistent with that, because it is one of the prakriyas in classical Advaita. Prakriyas means the methods by which you come to understand why you're not the body. One of them is the analysis of the 3 states, and it is said that in that analysis, it's only in waking and dream that we experience body and mind. In sleep, there's nothing. All that exists in sleep is our own being. So these 2 explanations are inconsistent. Moreover, there are Upanishads. Like, for example, probably the oldest of all the Upanishads is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In that, there's a chapter in which it is said why we don't see anything in sleep. Why we don't hear anything in sleep? Because there's nothing to see or hear. different explanations are given to suit people at different levels. But the typical explanation given in classical Advaita is that in sleep, the Anandamaya kosha remains. That is why Lakshman Sharma is writing in that way, explaining it. But that is not consistent with a lot of things that Bhagavan has taught us. So the simplest way is the way Bhagavan has taught us. Sleep is a state in which ego or mind does not exist at all. Since ego doesn't exist, nothing exists. So only if we want to know, then if ego doesn't exist in sleep, how does it come into existence in waking? And how is it the same ego? If it ceased to exist, how can the same ego come back into existence? So it must have existed in some way. If we want such explanations are given to us. But the point is, this ego is not real, even when it seems to exist. Ego certainly doesn't seem to exist in sleep. So why should we insist that it exists, even when it doesn't seem to exist, when Bhagavan teaches us that it doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist? So, but because people ask questions, explanations have to be given. This is why Bhagavan said different teachings have to be given to suit people of different levels of mental maturity. Some people will not be satisfied without an explanation. So an explanation is given. In sleep, there's a karana sarira. But has anyone ever experienced the karana sarira? Oh yes, the darkness of sleep is the karana sarira. In whose view is the sleep a state of darkness? Only in the view of ego in waking and dream. So whichever way we think of it, it's not a satisfactory explanation. And it's an unnecessary, well, it may be necessary for some people, but if we want to understand Bhagavan's teachings as they are, we don't have to go to these unnecessary explanations, because Bhagavan has made it clear what explanations are useful only to the extent to which they encourage us to attend to ourselves. All these sort of extraneous explanations are not helpful at all, because they're not helping us to attend to ourselves. So this idea that in sleep the causal body remains is what Bhagavan would refer to as an answer given to the question of others. That is a term that he used in Uladu Napadu Anubandham. In verse 33, Bhagavan says, this verse 33 of Uladu Napadu Anubandham, saying that Sanchita and Agamya do not adhere to Vijnani, Prarabdha does remain, is an answer told to the question of others. Like the husband dying and an unwidowed wife not remaining, the doer dying, all the three karmas will cease. What he means by that analogy is, if a husband is married to 3 wives, if a husband dies, all 3 wives become widowed. You don't get 2 wives becoming widows and 1 remaining unwidowed. That's why he says an unwidowed wife not remaining. So the ego is the doer of action and the experiencer of the fruit of action. So when ego dies, there's no doer to do the agamya, and there's no ego, there's no experiencer to experience the fruit of the agamya, the sanchita and the prarabdha. So all 3 cease to exist when ego dies. But here he uses this term, vetra, what is it? Vetra kelviku vilambam solam is a word or an answer told to the question of others. Many explanations are explanations given to the question of others. What he means here by vetra, others, is those who are not ready to understand the deeper teachings. They have to be given teachings that will suit them, that will satisfy them. So this idea that the causal body or Anandamaya kosha remains in sleep, that is also an answer given to the question of others. We can't say Lakshman Sharma is wrong doing that, because it's there in classical Advaita, but it's not a necessary explanation. And it rather confuses when we try to, these unnecessary explanations, when we try to mix them up with Bhagavan's teachings, we are just muddying the water. Bhagavan has made things very clear and very simple. So we shouldn't try and confuse it again by bringing in the unnecessary explanations that don't help us to understand Bhagavan's teachings in their pure simplicity.
Michael, we have about 5 more questions.
Okay, I'll try and answer quickly.
If you want to continue.
Yeah, let's try.
Quickly. So the question is, in Nanyar, question 9, Bhagavan answers by saying, that which rises as I in the body is the mind. Where exactly in the body does I rise that he is referring to?
That's a way of expressing it. He's not saying about it rises in a particular place in the body. That is, when ego rises, it rises in the form, I am this body. That is, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, Urupatri Undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as I am this body. That is, in other words, as soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and experience it as I. Since the I is always, the I that has risen is always experienced in this body. That is, I am here, I'm not there. We feel us, when we rise as ego, we feel ourselves limited to the body. As he says in verse 24 of Uludunapadu, he says, Udal Alava. Udal Alava means to the extent, as the extent of a body. Udal Alava nanondru udikum ideo. In between, one thing I rises as the extent of a body. So this I, ego, seems to be limited within the extent of this body. We experience this body itself as I. So when he says the I that rises in this body, he means the I that rises as I am this body. The I that experiences itself limited within the confines of this body. So he's not referring to a place. But then he says in that, wait a second, I'll just get that, what he says in this paragraph, whatever it is that rises in this body as I, that alone is the mind. If one investigates what place the thought called I first appears in the body, one will come to know that it is in the heart. The word he uses for heart here is hridayam, hridayatil, in the heart. People take this to mean, oh, then he's talking here about the place 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. No, that's not what he means. Because when Bhagavan talks about investigating the place where I rises, what he means by place, he's not talking about a place in a literal sense. He uses the word place metaphorically as the source. So what is the source from which I rises in this body, first appears in this body? It's not a place in the body, because the body cannot exist independent of I. Because as he says in the previous paragraph, he said, there's no such thing as world apart from, what does he say? Excluding thoughts, there is not separately any such thing as world. That means the whole world is nothing but thoughts. And later on in the 14th paragraph, he says, Jagamembadu Ninebe. What is called the world is only thoughts. So since the world is only thoughts, the body is also a thought. And he says, of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. So the body cannot exist prior to the rising of I. So it cannot be, body cannot be rising from any place in the body. So when he says, if one investigates in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, that is, the I rises in the body in the sense that it rises along with the body as I am this body. The place where it rises from is the heart. What he means by the heart is not 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. Heart is as he makes clear in so many places, heart is nothing but our own being. Heart is our real nature. Heart is Atmaswarupa. Heart is the pure awareness I. So he's not talking about a place in the body. But people interpret things in their own way, and they think, oh, in some places Bhagavan has said the heart is 2 digits to right from the center of the chest. Why did Bhagavan say that? Because when Bhagavan spoke about the heart, he's talking about our real nature. But people who've got a gross outward-looking mind, they persistently ask Bhagavan, oh Bhagavan, this heart you talk of, whereabouts in the body is it? Is it the same as the Anahata chakra? Oh, Bhagavan said, no, it's not the Anahata chakra. Then where in the body is it? So to satisfy such people, Bhagavan said, relative to this body, the Hirdiyasthana, the place of the heart in the body, is 2 digits right from the center of the chest. That is only because when we experience this body as I, that is what we feel as the center. When we, as Bhagavan often said, if a schoolboy says, I can do the sum correctly, he points to his chest. If he says, I will run and fetch a newspaper, he points to his chest. He doesn't point to his feet and say, I will run and fetch for newspaper. He doesn't point to his head and say, I will do the sum correctly. Naturally, we all naturally indicate this place 2 digits right from the center of the chest when we refer to ourselves. So that is the place, the central location of ego in the body, we can say. Though the whole body is felt as I, that is where the feeling of I is centered in the body. But that is ego. That is not very, because what our real nature is beyond all these names and forms, all limitations. It has no, it's beyond time and place. So, but Bhagavan often used the Tamil word idam, place, in a metaphorical sense to mean the ground, the source from which we have risen. So when we read things, we need to read with understanding of what Bhagavan is talking about. If we take sentences out of context and try and interpret them without considering in the light of Bhagavan's overall teaching, we are liable to misunderstand them. That is, ego rises in waking and dream. It subsides in sleep. So what ego rises from and what it subsides into must be what exists in sleep. What exists in sleep is only our own being, I am. So I am this body, namely ego, rises from the fundamental awareness I am. So I am alone is the heart, as Bhagavan made clear in so many places.
The next question, Michael, is it's maybe it says, maybe I misunderstand, but when we attend to ourselves, don't we go into manōlaya? Then how will the ego be destroyed? If Michael said earlier that the ego can't be destroyed in that state.
No, we don't go. If we are attending, so long as we're attending to ourselves, we are not in manōlaya. When we are trying to attend to ourselves, we can lose our hold on self-attentiveness in one of two ways. Either we can be carried away by thoughts, or we can subside in manōlaya. But so long as we're holding on to I am, we will neither be swayed by thoughts, nor will we subside in laya. It's only when we let go of our hold on I am, but one or other of these two can occur. What does holding on to I mean? We're not holding with our hands or anything. It's with our attention that we're holding on to ourselves. That is the ego, as Bhagavan says, it's a formless phantom. But he says ego rises, grasping the body it stands, grasping and feeding on forms it flourishes. How does ego grasp? It can only grasp in its awareness. Awareness means attention is the tool by which we grasp things other than ourselves. So the same attention when we turn back towards ourselves, that is what Bhagavan calls holding on to ourselves, holding on to our being, not letting go of ourselves. So long as we are holding on to ourselves, that means so long as we're not letting go of that fundamental awareness I am, we were not in layer. And if we are holding on to that firmly enough, we're also not in thought. We are between the two. That is the true meaning of samadhi. It's that state of samatvam, of balance between these two extremes, between the subsidence of mind, dissolution of mind on the one hand, layer, and activity of the mind on the other. We need to remain balanced between these two. The balance between dissolution and activity, just in the state of pure being. That's why in the Upanishads it's referred to as the razor's edge. We need to be carefully balanced between thought on the one hand, mental activity, that is, and on the other hand, cessation of mental activity, that is the dissolution of mind. So we want to remain between the two, neither being carried away by mental activity nor slipping into layer dissolution. Because our aim is to know ourselves. So we have to be fully awake to know ourselves. That means we have to be alert. So self-attentiveness is a state of perfect alertness. But alert to nothing other than ourselves, our own being. Yes, sorry, Shalini, I interrupted you.
No, I think that's important. This is a comment on the question on yoga, which is that yoga is the heart of the Gita. In fact, it is the goal of the Gita, and no matter what the chapter, it always ends with yoga. So the giving up of all assumed identities is yoga. It doesn't always mean mind control by pranayama. And there's a quotation, Swarupe Avasthanam, which is abiding in the real nature is yoga from the Gita.
Yeah, there are so many beautiful definitions. One definition in Gita, what I really like is something like dukkha yoga viyogam yogam. That is, the separation of our union with misery is yoga. So he gives many definitions. The word yoga has many different meanings in different contexts. Yoga is often used as a term for any type of spiritual practice. That's why we talk of the Vichara yoga, the 4 yogas, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, the Patanjali yoga, the yoga, and jnana yoga. These are all called yogas. So in that context, yoga means spiritual practice. But the word yoga also in certain contexts refers to Patanjali's yoga. And Patanjali has systemized it. Yoga is predated Patanjali, but he systemized this yoga, and he started with the definition of yoga as yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So yoga in the sense of Patanjali yoga is restraining mental activity. But when Lakshman Sharma, I think in some context, Bhagavan told Lakshman Sharma, when Lakshman Sharma was asking something about yoga, Bhagavan referred to this path of self-investigation, saying, this is the Maha-yoga. This is the great yoga, the ultimate yoga. That's why Lakshman Sharma called his book, the English book he wrote, as Maha-yoga. So yoga, in Gita, Krishna uses yoga in many different senses, and he gives many beautiful definitions of yoga. So we, like so many words, we need to understand the meaning of the word yoga from the context. So when we're talking about yoga as one of the 4 paths, that is referring to Patanjali's yoga. But that doesn't, we cannot limit the word yoga just to Patanjali's yoga, but often the word yoga is used in the sense of Patanjali's yoga. Vivekananda, I think, coined a new term for it. He called it Raja Yoga. king yoga. But as far as I'm aware, the term Raja Yoga wasn't used before Vivekananda. It was just to distinguish this yoga from the other three yogas, he called it Raja Yoga. What he means by Raja Yoga is Patanjali's yoga.
There's another question. Is it true that out of compassion, Bhagavan would take on other people's karma to reduce their burden, or is this untrue?
That's all. Bhagavan is beyond karma. He is not the doer of karma. He's untouched by karma. He says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, Oru karmamum avare otadu. Not even a single karma adheres to him. Him here refers to God. And Bhagavan is obviously, as he said in the 12th paragraph, God and Guru are in truth not different. So Bhagavan is beyond all karma. He's untouched by karma. But by just being as he is, as he also says in the beautiful term he used in this 15th paragraph, Isan Sanidana Visesha Matratal, by the mere special nature of the presence of God. So by Bhagavan's the special nature of Bhagavan's presence, by his mere being as he is, he allots the fruit of our karmas. So he is the ordainer of the fruit of our karmas, but he is ever untouched by karma. So does Bhagavan take our karmas? Some devotees may consider yes. But some people say, why Bhagavan suffer from cancer? Because he took on the karmas of others. If that explanation satisfies us, who is to dispute it? These are all just different explanations we as devotees can give. But actually, once we do an action, the fruit of that action is out of our hands. The fruit of the act, that's what Bhagavan says in the very first verse of Upadesha Undiyar. Karmam payandal kartana danaya. Karma giving fruit is by the ordainment of God. So God or Bhagavan alone allots the fruit of our action. He doesn't just allot any fruit. He gives appropriate fruit for each action, and when, where, and how we should experience those fruit is also decided by him. So as Bhagavan sometimes said, whether you call it prarabdha or the will of God, it's the same thing. It amounts to the same. So whatever we experience is the fruit of our past actions, but it's the fruit selected by Bhagavan and given to us to experience now. Why does he select it in such a way and give it to us now? Because it is what is most conducive to our spiritual development. So rather than thinking of Bhagavan taking on our karma or removing our karma, he's giving us, we should take our prarabdha as his prasadam. As he is, it's his blessing. But whatever prarabdha we're given, it's his blessing. If we suffer, that is his blessing. If we have a pleasant time, that is whatever we experience, whatever is given to us to experience as prarabdha, that is all his blessing. If we view it in that way, then that is changing our attitude. We won't expect Bhagavan should remove our karma or take our karma onto himself. We have done so many karmas. Let him allot the fruit of that karma in such a way that will be most conducive to our spiritual development. That is what he is doing anyway. So that's a more useful and a more accurate way of viewing it. But if we want to believe Bhagavan has taken on the fruit of my karmas, no one's going to object to that. But it's possibly not such a deep explanation as the explanation that Bhagavan has given.
That was the last question.
Okay.
As far as I know, have I missed anything, anyone? I went through all the questions and double checked. Yeah, so I think we managed to do everything. Okay, so we can do the closing mantra.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.